like to invite the chairperson of the award committee, Dr. Rasul Minja.
The acting Vice Chancellor, Professor Bonfrey Kandala, distinguished Professor Musambai Katumanga, all protocols. The citation is a bit lengthy. I'm going to read some of the passages of this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to citation to you on the remarkable and celebrated life of one of Africa's and Tanzania's most decorated diplomat African who served the United Republic of Tanzania, its commitment and distinction. As it serving his country or the African continent, Dr. sends to speak for themselves. Undoubted successful African diplomats of our lifetime needed to be accomplished rather than seeking the Dr. Salim's cherished life story demonstrated quiet action. His tenacity to make a lasting, united, integrated, peaceful, and prosperous Africa's contemporaries. Birth and education. Dr. 1942 in Unguja. From 1948 to 1956, Uweleni Primary School in Pemba, and then later Darajani and Mash. 1957 to 1960, Dr. Salim attended secondary education at Benbela High School, and later joined King George Secondary School, now is known as Lumumba College in Unguja. From 1965 to 1968, he enrolled for undergraduate studies at St. Stephen's College of the University of Delhi. He obtained his master's degree in international affairs from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University in New York in 1975. Besides his early involvement in Zanzibar nationalist struggles as the founding vice chairperson of the All Zanzibar National Students Organization and Secretary General of the Youth Own Union, which was the youth wing of the Zanzibar Nationalist Party, ZNP, Dr. Salim served as the editor of the ZNP, the Umma Party, and then Sauti ya Vyama Tisa newspapers. This one was a publication by an alliance of the opposition parties in Zanzibar political struggles. He subsequently became the Secretary General of all Zanzibar Journalists Organization. Diplomatic service. At 22, Salim was the youngest African ambassador representing the United Republic of Tanzania in Egypt from 1964 to 1965. He was appointed Tanzania's High Commissioner to India from 1965 to 1968, and then he was posted to China as an ambassador from 1969 to 1970. In early 1970, Dr. Salim was posted to New York as head of Tanzania's permanent mission at the UN. You all remember in 1981, with the support of the OAU and the non-alignment movement, Dr. Salim ran for the Secretary General of the United Nations against the two-term incumbent, by then was cut by them, of Austria. Dr. Salim was then serving as the President of the United Nations General Assembly. Dr. Salim won the first round, but later withdrew from the race, ending a 6-week deadlock over 16 rounds of voting and opening up the selection to other candidates. Positions in government. The first President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, nominated Dr. Salim as the Member of Parliament and subsequently appointed him his Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1980 to 1984. He was appointed the country's Prime Minister from April 1984 to November 1985, succeeding Prime Minister Edward Sokoine, who was killed in a road accident. During the 1985 general elections, Dr. Salim was elected as a Member of Parliament for the Mkoani constituency in Pemba South region. And then from 1985 to 1989, he served as a Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense and National Service in President Ali Hassan Mwinyi's government. As OAU's Secretary General, in July 1988, Dr. Salim was elected to the leadership of the OAU for 3 consecutive terms. Dr. Salim's enviable legacy during his unprecedented 12 years tenure at the OAU has been well captured by the then chairperson of the AU Commission, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Allow me to read part of her words on Dr. Salim. I quote, "When Salim assumed the leadership of the OAU as its Secretary General in 1989, he brought the role of a wealth of international experience and a keen recognition of the need to transform Africa from being the playground of the superpowers to becoming a relevant player that charts its own destiny. His landmark 1990 report on the fundamental changes taking place in the global landscape and their implications for Africa remains a continental roadmap and one of his greatest legacies to the continent." I know a few of you know about this report. The declaration adopted by the OAU summit in the same year outlined most of the priorities now contained in the Africa Peace and Security Architecture and the African Governance Architecture. As OAU Secretary General, Salim worked tirelessly to help our leaders lay the legal foundation that led to the institutional transformation of the OAU into the African Union and the adoption of its vision for a united, integrated, and prosperous Africa. A continent at peace with itself, driven by its own people, and representing a dynamic force in global affairs. Salim never accepted the status quo if it perpetuated suffering. For example, during his tenure as OAU Secretary General, he became critical of the way that the OAU principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of member states hampered continental institutions from preventing grave injustice against African people. In Addis Ababa in May 1963, they had not intent of the OAU Charter to mean there will be no interference. The OAU Constitutive Act still maintains the non-interference. It is also enshrined in the Act. Upholding the right of the Union to intervene in war crimes and crimes against humanity. Public life, term of office at the OAU. Upon his return to Tanzania, OAU Secretary General, Dr. Salim served in various posts in the committee of the ruling CCM. Chair of the Board of Trustees. 2011, he was appointed to serve in the 20th Constitutional Review Commission by President Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete. At the continental level, he continued to serve as one of the members of the OAU's panel of the WISE and AU Special Envoy on the Darfur conflict from 2004 to 2008. Also, he served as a member of the board at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. By then, he was a chair of the foundation's Ibrahim's Prize Committee, having taken over from the inaugural chair, Kofi Annan, in 2011. Dr. Salim remained inspirational to the youth and shared his experience widely. He readily participated in many of the discussions in different fora at the University of Dar es Salaam. He was a recipient of many honors and awards. I'm not going to go through them. You have noticed that he received the Order of the United Republic, also the Oliver Tambo Award, the Boot for Achievement in Conflict Resolution, Democracy and Human Rights. To conclude, Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim is, without a doubt, a great personality, an epitome of humility, patriotic leadership, and great devotion to the Pan-African ideals of a continent which is united, integrated, peaceful, prosperous, resilient, and influential global player and partner. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, pardon me, I should have recognized within us the presence of the son of Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim. Ahmed is with us. Yeah. May you please come to the high table? With all due respects, I will now call upon the Mwalimu Nyerere Chair, Professor, to hand over the award. Okay. Now, if you have anything to say, Salim, please come.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. One of the many lessons I've learned from my father is when you're in a room with distinguished gentlemen and ladies, your best way is just to say all protocols observed so that you don't get in trouble later on by missing anyone that's distinguished. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. I don't have much to say. I don't think I can follow that citation, but I will try my best. Obviously, it's a pleasure to be here to represent the family and Dr. Salim. I know he would have been very honored and grateful to be here, but as you know, he's not been well for a few years, but I think he's with us in spirit. I think we can all pray and hope for good health and prosperity for Dr. Salim. I think there's just one story I might want to share with you. It's based off of remarks that former President Thabo Mbeki mentioned a few years ago that encapsulate today's theme of Pan-Africanism. I think it's not lost on any of us that this award is being honored and bestowed to Dr. Salim at the University of Dar es Salaam, which is a beacon of Pan-Africanism and African intellectualism. So I think it's very befitting that this has happened, so I'm very grateful to the university leadership for doing this. In 2017, Dr. Salim was in Johannesburg for the annual Thabo Mbeki lecture, where President Mbeki, in introducing him, was explaining how normally when a president receives the credentials of ambassadors, there's an expectation that the individual is quite well experienced, many years of experience as well. And in how he was explaining Dr. Salim, if he was president at the time when he was receiving credentials of a 22-year-old, he would have sent those credentials back saying, "Why are you sending a baby to South Africa?" But it was in that clip which President Mbeki also spoke to the experience and passion for Pan-Africanism, for liberation for Dr. Salim, which in many ways he did say that, of course, throughout Dr. Salim's life, there's almost 3 key characteristics that you can always rely on. His activism, he was an activist, especially in the early days of the 60s and 70s. He was a diplomat, which is also something that has been described in the citation. And more importantly, he was a Pan-Africanist, which is something that he, you know, even to the past few years, something that he's quite passionate about. And finally, a statesman, both for here in Tanzania and somebody that we can all be proud for. I always used to joke with my friends that being an ambassador at 22, I think that ship has sailed in trying to fill those shoes, so I wasn't even trying. So, but yeah, just really wanted to thank the leadership. I really appreciate being here. I do recognize that there's a lot that we can learn from this. We have a lot of leaders in our history in Tanzania that we need to remember. I'm grateful that we remember Dr. Salim, and I think over the next few months, I see Mzee Bugoye here, we have quite a lot of invested work that we've done to remember Dr. Salim for a digital archive, but also in that story, we tell a story of Tanzania and the important role Tanzania has played throughout history that I think we need to remind everybody for. But yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, the MC can take over for the next session.
Thank you very much, the award committee. And I think we can all agree that this is a deserving award to one of the most important sons of Africa, Honorable Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim. Na kukutambua umuhimu wake, napenda tushirikiane kumpigia Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim makofi 321. Nitawaongoza. Tutampigia Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim makofi 321. Natoa mwongozo. Tutapasha kama kawaida yetu, si ndio? Tukishamaliza kupasha, nikisema choma utapiga mara 3. Mnapata? 321, 3 ya kwanza. Tumeelewa? 321. Sasa pasha. Mpashia the greatest son of Africa, Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim. Pasha, pasha, pasha. Choma. Thank you very much. So if you look at our program, we are supposed to have a keynote address on African leadership in 21st century, expectation, challenges, and dynamic by Professor Adebayo Lukush from South Africa. Unfortunately, we shall not have that address today, so we'll go straight to the paper presentation. We'll go straight to the paper presentation on democratization and economic development. Is the economy growth dividend a myth or a reality? And I wish to take this opportunity to invite the chair of the panel, Dr. Donald Mari, and our paper presenters, Professor Jehovanes Aikaeli, Professor Ebo Kenyondo, and Mr. Sabato Nyamsenda.
ready to start? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be chairing this session this afternoon. Thank you very much, Chair, Professor Kandara. We have 3 presenters in front of us: Professor Jehovenas Aikaeli, Professor Abel Kinyondo, sitting on my left, and Mr. Sabato Nyamsenda, sitting on my far left. I have been corrected, it's extreme left. That extreme means something, and I hope we will hear that extremism. Thank you, Prof. We will start with the Professor Jehovenas Aikaeli on democratization and economic development. We want to get the answer on the question, is the economic growth dividend or a myth or a reality? Professor Aikaeli, you have the floor. One of my terms of reference is to observe time. So, Professor, you have 20 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Mwalimu Nyerere, Professor Chair, for invitation for me to participate and make a presentation in this gathering. I'm going to be brief. I think I'll be able to beat the time as I'm supposed to do. Democratization and economic development is the economic growth dividend, or, economic growth dividend, is it a myth or a reality? I think it's important for me to just make it as a highlight that I'll be speaking very briefly on a democracy and development, some sort of perspectives, and of course highlight certain controversy. I'll also be speaking a little bit about economic growth dividend, whether it is a myth or is a reality, but based on statistics and the comparisons. And then I'll be looking at how to create dynamic comparative advantage for the country to break through in terms of growth. And of course, the issues of democratization will be coming into the context as I discuss. My name is already mentioned as Jehovenas Aikaeli. I'm coming from School of Economics, at the University of Dar es Salaam. I think this is enough for now. Well, first let me begin with a point on democracy and development. Most of the researchers have invested their time attempting to find out whether these two concepts are related, and also which one of the two causes the other. Of course, whether they are related or not, it is firmly agreed that they are related, we're related. But But which one causes the other? It has remained to be a sort of egg-chicken issue, which I think most of you know, that at times, if you are looking at democracy, is democracy that should start and that causes growth, or it is growth if the country grows, then it goes on to democratization ultimately. Now, I think I'll not take a lot of time attempting to resolve this, because the issue of causality, which one causes the other, it has not yet got a sort of firmly agreed stand that democracy causes growth or growth causes democracy. But democratic systems or democratic principles have several channels through which they affect growth and development of any country across the world. And of course, these channels, just to mention a few, include one which is leading civil liberty. Civil liberty is one of the channels that people are free to move on the development process under democratic environment. The other channel that we can mention is very important. Democratic environment makes it possible for private investments to thrive. The other channel that we can mention is that when in democracy, there are well-defined roles, capacity, and responsibilities of government, private sector across. So it is one of the channels that we know will cherish development. And of course, under democracy, it is sure that there is a reduction of these social frictions and conflicts, and this is key to growth. Many writers have done work there. I'm not going to go through literature review, but I have these my presentation shown. One of very famous writer who has done a great deal in this area is Asimoglu, and he was writing after a controversy that was raised by famous researchers. Just to mention a few is Robert Barrow, 1997, and of course Friedman, this is Tom Friedman, not the old Friedman, who had shown that democracy is not a key to economic development. It's not key to economic development. But Asimoglu, the one I mentioned, they had a seminal paper, and one of these that I'll mention is one of 2019, which he actually wrote and makes evidence that, well, it is obvious that democratization is so much evident in countries, and it has larger implication in countries with high growth and high level of education. So there is a support that if the country has high growth, and of course its education level is good, there will be larger effect of democratization than in countries that have low level of growth and low education. But he also makes counter-argument, which is very important to note, that there is a assertion that says dictatorship is optimal for less developed countries, is more optimal than democracy. And this is famous argument, and of course, Simagul makes counter argument that this is not true. There is no good reason why that should be. And there is a question that we'll be asking among ourselves, as also Asimeglu asked, whether there is a strong evidence that democracy is not optimal for small economies. Of course, there is no one nice, strong evidence that democracy is not optimal for small economies, developing countries like Tanzania, etc. And democracies, as we know, they are more pro-reforms as compared to dictatorship. And not only that, but also we know democracies make a sort of broad investments, especially in areas where the leadership or the administration will have responsibility, like education and health. Broad investment will take place in democracy. But also, as we look at it, I spoke about the causality as to whether democracy will cause development or development will cause democracy. Indeed, there are two strands of argument, and one of these strands of argument is this that starts from development, that if there's going to be growth will derive a sort of social mobilization, and this social mobilization will drive a kind of political mobilization, and ultimately it will end up with regime change to democracy. This is one strand of argument. But the second strand of argument that is also so famous is we're looking at democratization as being the point of departure and that the economy will grow fast under democracy, and as it grows fast, there will be confidence, there will be confidence for the investors that the property they are accumulating will be protected, and for that matter, it tells us that democratic societies will ensure growth that way. So two strands of arguments, but like I said, we are not going to invest time there, and probably we don't need to resolve a puzzle which is more difficult for this short time we are given. Is economic growth dividend economic growth dividend, is it myth or reality? Well, the ultimate objective of any economic policy is, one, to enhance growth, that there should be growth. Two, employment of the people to make the means for welfare as they receive income. And of course, stability of the economy at large. Now, countries need economic growth with dividend, with a positive dividend. Why they need? They need it, and it will be in terms of, one, high per capita income that they will be able to drive from growth. Income will grow, of course, from performance. Increased life expectancy, people's longevity of life will increase. That is good because it will be evidence of quality of life. And of course, high human development at large, which means economic growth as a means towards human development, not the end on its own. Now, if we are speaking of this growth as having dividend, and the question that will be important to us is whether it is really going to be evident or it is not evident from statistics. I'll be able to show that. But what do I do in order to make it possible to ascertain whether it is reality or myth? I decided to go for statistics. And this is, I took two countries that are well-performing economies, but the recent ones, I decided to go for the Asian tigers. I picked two countries. These are Singapore and South Korea, purposely. And then I picked two countries that are performing not as much, but they are sort of the demarcating countries, middle-income countries. One of it is a high, call it high or upper middle-income country in Africa. I decided to go for Mauritius. And one, a demarcating case, that is lower middle-income country in Africa. I went for Tanzania. And the two low-performing economies in sub-Saharan Africa, I decided to go for Burundi and Malawi, just for comparisons. I would like you to know that he is taking these for comparisons to see whether growth really makes dividend that is a myth or reality. And I'm using data from World Development Indicators, and also I'm using United Nations Development Program data of human development. I think this would be fair to go for that set. So two things or three I'm going to highlight quickly from statistics. Economic growth in per capita income. Economic growth in per capita income will be seen from my presentation. If I compare these 6 countries, what I see, especially from the initial years of economic transformation, you realize I have it showing at least years, 1990, 10 years average of economic growth. Then 1991, I started 1980 to 1990 average growth, to 1990 to 80 to 90, then 90 to 2000, 2000 to 2010, 10 years average, growth average for these countries, 6 countries. And I'm looking at their growth rates generally. I see the Asian tigers, the 2 countries I took, South Korea and Singapore, having a much higher growth than these other remaining 4 countries. And then followed by Mauritius for this average of 10 years, then followed by Tanzania, then followed by by Malawi and then Burundi. Their growth rates. I'm saying that is fine, the growth rates. But as I move from the growth rates, I'm trying to look at the growth rates and the per capita incomes. Actually, by arranging them chronologically, you will find these countries, the ones that had higher growth rates, have higher per capita income sequentially, including the demarcating cases of two countries, middle-income countries, the lowest performing in Africa, and the two tigers, sequentially, just to mention. And when I look at the dividend, of course, I'm looking at the dividend of this growth in terms of per capita. I see it obvious that there is a gain that is coming into the people's hands in terms of income that is a result of the economic performance, the respective country's economic performance. So it tells me that one thing that we'll all appreciate is as growth takes, it goes well, then per capita income per person increases across, and it is sequential in the context of countries that I'm using as an example. That is one. Then two, I decided to go for economic growth and life expectancy. Why? I'm saying growth dividend that we'll all appreciate is that growth be able to provide us longevity, in terms of longevity of life. That you have longer life because you are as well getting better growth, not only because you are praying more, it's important, but it is also because you are growing. Yes, I'm looking at these countries in terms of growth, per capita, and then life expectancy. The sequential arrangement that I'm having is, I see Singapore leading in terms of life expectancy. The years are there for all these average of 10 years, because I'm also taking average of 10 years of life expectancy, followed by South Korea, then followed by Mauritius, followed by Tanzania, followed by Malawi, at the end, Burundi. Comparison. It is showing so well. I said it's not enough. Let me go for coefficients, attempt to find the correlation coefficients. Is growth correlated with life expectancy? Economic performance correlated with the life expectancy? Just to mention, yes, highly positive correlated. Correlation starts from 0 to 1. And these correlations for the average of 10 years up to 1990, up to 2000, to 2010 and 2020 are all above 8, 0.8. Save for 2000, which was 0.79, which means life expectancy and growth highly correlated, over 8, 0.8 correlation. So it tells me there's a dividend from growth, there's a dividend to life expectancy. And I think these must be appreciated, my opinion. Third, I attempted to look at growth and human development, because statistics are there. Is there a dividend that comes from growth to human development? I looked at these countries in terms of the ranking from the UNDP statistics, and it is showing us that, Singapore is leading, is higher, followed by South Korea, followed by Mauritius, followed by Tanzania, followed by Malawi, and lastly, Burundi. So it tells me what? Economic growth and human development, highly correlated. I did correlation coefficients between economic performance, especially looking at GDP per capita, and human development. All the correlation coefficients for 10 years average, for the periods I mentioned, correlation coefficients are higher than 0.8, which means from 0 to 1, over 0.8 you are close to 1, which means they are highly correlated, and that tells us that there is a dividend that comes from economic growth to human development. And of course, I decided to go a little bit further, look at correlation coefficients between life expectancy and human development. Why? Because I've seen that life expectancy is well influenced by economic performance. But does it really relate with the overall human development in multidimensional context of development? It is showing me more than 0.9. It is 0.993991, telling me that there is a great deal of economic contribution of economic growth and performance to human development as a means, not, of course, the end, but at least growth as a means. So simply, it tells us that, well, there is a good deal of dividend that is actually a reality from economic growth and performance to development general, to growth, to development, human development in that perspective. Then I said this is not enough. Let me at least make a note on creating dynamic comparative advantage in order to raise growth, for that matter, to be able to enhance our dividends in terms of life expectancy, in terms of human development and everything. Just to add on my presentation, that is important to know where we have come from. We came from most of countries in 70s, not most, actually some countries, believed that the only way that we could break through is to resort to import substitution rationalization, kind of inward-looking economic policy, which is not as convincing for now to most of the analysts and policymakers. And one of the reasons why this is happening is because in those old times, we were looking at the benefit we could reap from the natural resources we had, and whatever you can think in terms of factors endowment is to be more competitive in that perspective. Nevertheless, at the moment, countries have discovered that having natural resources, a lot of it, is an added advantage, but is not going to be a determinant of you to be a more competitive country. Why this is the case is because if you have more capital today, you have to understand that this capital is relatively so much mobile. If you have sort of knowledge embedded in your production, it is also so much mobile at the moment. And if you have skilled people, they are at the moment so much mobile. So we have no competitive advantage that we are going to reap from having a lot of endowment of natural resources in order to enhance this growth that we see that it has dividend. What do we do, or what do we think? At the moment, we have a sort of what we are referring to as dynamic comparative advantage that the countries have to harness. Tanzania, one of the developing countries that we have to harness. And this is, just to mention, the sources of dynamic comparative advantage that are necessary to be harnessed include the skills of our people, their health, and discipline of work. That is, if you want to break through, one thing that I just mentioned, I'm not going to explain, is the skills of our people upstairs improve there, health of our people, they are able to work, and the discipline in where they are functioning. Two, embedded knowledge in terms of the knowledge that is locked in your processes, in your production, should be enhanced if you want to break through in terms of growth, and thus be able to reap the benefits and all the dividends we mentioned. Institutions and norms, key, and it must be reformed. If no reforms there, whatever we do, we discuss, it will not make us, we cannot break through. Physical infrastructure is mentioned as enabling part of vital ingredient, and that is important because it enables production we cannot ignore. And lastly, is the reputation or branding of the country. If we do this, we invest there in a broad context, we'll be able to break through. And all these will contribute the country's ability to attract and retain talented skills and capital from across the world. And that's what we want. We do not really need to resort to inward-looking strategies, and we don't need to cherish inefficiencies by attempting to produce everything at home just because you like it to harness home market. If Japan today will be producing Toyota for every Japanese to use, I believe that it wouldn't be a big deal. So even if you produce, just a minute, 1 minute, Chair, I'm finishing. If you would like to produce everything that you use in your economy, and for that matter, you are industrialized by import or by inward-looking strategy, even if you sell every item that each and every one of us uses at home from within, it cannot make a country different because it's still a very small market. So, to speak, it's important to note that as we learn from others, especially the newly industrialized countries that are growing at the moment in East, South Asia, in that area, you'll be able to see, not to copy and paste, but you'll be able to see that we need to at least note a few things. One, we need to note that one of the areas where they put a lot of emphasis, it was high domestic saving rates. They increased domestic savings to harness capital from within, despite the fact that they were open. They are not the most open economies, but they attempted to harness that. And the second, they had to resort to improved knowledge and skills from public schools because they are training majority of the people. And lastly, they had to put incentive that promote domestic economic development. And they noted one thing, without complaining, that they needed to enter global market, and they were able to enter without any godfather, telling us that indeed world market is not as rigid against all others, that we cannot go there because the rich have already got there. So we need to know that once we are competitive dynamically, as I mentioned, you can still embark onto the world market and trade. And we need to know that industrialization, growth, and development must be based not on inward-looking strategy, but we need to be open and compete globally, dynamically. Mr. Chairman, I think I stop there in the interest of time. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Based on the evidence that you have shown. Yeah, based on the evidence that you have shown, appears that you are saying that indeed growth has a dividend towards development. What I would like you to answer during the time that you are responding to questions, or I believe Professor Keynote can do that in his presentation, is whether countries, what makes countries like Equatorial Guinea, with the highest per capita income in Africa, has such a high rates of poverty, close to 50%. And Nigeria, which also has a very high per capita income, one of the oil exporters, has a GDP, tax to GDP share of less than, ratio of less than, close to 5%, which is much less than sub-Saharan average. So the next presenter is Professor Abel Kinyondo on resource nationalism, local content and resource curse, African experiences. Professor Kinyondo, you also have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Donald. I'm very much honored to be here. Thank you, Professor Mkandala, for welcoming me. It's an honor, sir. Thank you, Donald, and the invited guests. I want to give a story today because I've got only 20 minutes, and I hope to sell you a story that will give you more questions than answers, because my job is to make you think and therefore have a lot more questions than answers. I'll be talking about extractives in most of my presentation. And we really need to talk about it. We need to talk about our mining, we need to talk about our oil and gas. And I will submit to you, we need to do that because our entire civilization is anchored into this. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look around, you will see mines everywhere. For those who do not know, sand, gravel, and the likes are just but industrial minerals. If you get out and you look at tarmac road, then you're looking at minerals out there. You go to your car, the car is made of minerals. And you want to start it, it has to have gas for it to go. So you take out extractives and we go back to all this technology. That's why we need to talk about these things. And Donald just touched that some of countries in Africa have abundance of these natural resources, but they are still very poor in terms of what their citizens have. And we have been complaining about this for so many years, that we have been shortchanged. And some of these issues are very real and have been looked at. Even our Africa Mining Vision suggests to effects of that. It is because of this feeling that we have been shortchanged, we, as the continent and indeed developing world, started to embrace resource nationalistic policies. Ladies and gentlemen, resource nationalism is an attempt of by resource-rich countries to add tech from extractives. So you want to take more from God-given resources, and by that you do resource nationalism. Now, I want to break it down quickly into 4 forms for you to have that understanding. The first form of resource nationalism is in terms of increasing ownership. So countries decide that for us to have a bigger tech in extractives, we need to own more. Countries like Tanzania did that. You remember 2017 reforms, when in one of the clauses we decided to add, and Professor Luoga just left, will know this much better than many, that in every extractive operation we should have 16% carried interest. So we have 16% ownership in any operation involving God-given resources that we have. That's the first form of resource nationalism. We want to increase ownership. The second form of it is increasing state participation. In most of countries, states have come up with companies so that they can increase participation. That is, you don't want to become a spectator, you want to be part of the doers in the sector. And that's why you have, like in Tanzania, we have got state mining corporations, TAMICO. In oil and gas, we have got a national oil company. Most of you know TPDC. All that is an attempt to increase participation. Now, how much we do participate, that's a different issue altogether. Some few months ago, I was looking at Stamico. It was literally dead some few years ago. Right now, it's coming up. And I was looking at where they make most of the money. You'll be surprised, they make most of the money by doing drilling in one of the biggest mines here in Tanzania. So a state actor is just one of many suppliers in private sector. And that tells you how little we have in terms of participation. Number 3 form of resource nationalism, and this is what we love to do, is increasing rents. When you hear there is inquiry in mining or anything of that nature, when you hear there is presidential committee, most of the times what they do is trying to maximize rent. By rents, I mean taxes, royalties, fees, etc. But this is what I call a lazy way to do it, and I will explain. Hopefully I'll have time to talk about these things in details. Because all rents are charged on profits, and profits are what I call leftovers. If I was having a PowerPoint, I would have shown you wonderful econometrics models, but to be honest, profits are nothing but revenues minus costs. Now, the research shows that in any extractive activity, an average of 75% of turnover is used in terms of operating costs. So by that understanding, your rents will only be charged on just 25% of the turnovers. That's why I called them leftovers. And ladies and gentlemen, even that 20% is the maximum you can have as leftovers, because the work of accountants anywhere in the world is trying to minimize the size of profit. That's why we'll never hear a large mining company complaining about corporate tax being large. Why? Because they know you are charging your corporate tax on leftover, the profits, and the accountants can just minimize that amount to a very small size, and therefore you are charging your taxes on a very small amount of turnovers, and therefore you don't do anything to them. In economics, we are talking about this concept of transfer mispricing. In this particular issue, we are talking about BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting. What these multinationals do is to shift around the profits that they get so that you are left with very little profit at home to tax on. And because of that, it doesn't matter how large your royalties are. It doesn't matter how large the corporate tax are. As long as you are charging it on a smaller portion, you don't get nothing from it. And therefore, resource nationalism in the form of maximizing rent is a lazy way to do it. Now, the last form of resource nationalism that I subscribe to, and I like it, and I want to sell it to you, is increasing citizen participation. Others call it local content. Now, let me break it down, local content. In simple explanation, local content is just increasing citizen participation. How? Let me break it down. The words are two, local and content. The first word has got 3 dimensions, just like the second word. The first word, local, has got 3 dimensions. The first one is geography. When you are looking at local content, we want to look at the geography. In most of African countries, when they look at geography, they are actually talking about countries. Even in our law, even if we don't say it explicitly. But if you go to Uganda, for instance, they call it national content, meaning anything within your boundaries is local. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when you're looking at local content, you have to look at geography in terms of not just national, but also into the vicinity where the actual extraction is taking place. I want to submit to you that what is happening around Nyamongo, Kabanga, or Geita does not happen in Dodoma where you make your laws and policies. The air pollution, water pollution, displacement is affecting people in the vicinity of operations and not in Dodoma. And therefore, you have to think of local, not only in terms of the country, but also in terms of vicinity. How are we going to compensate them? And compensation is not just some changes like the CSR and development levies, but trying to make sure that people living in that vicinity get compensated through various ways of participating into the very game. So that's the first part in the local geography. It's national and local also. The second part in the local is ownership. You want to increase ownership both nationally and within the vicinity. And the last one is value addition. We have talked about concentrate in 2017 so much. I know you understand it. I don't have time to break it down, but you want value addition. You don't just want to sell raw. Now, the content bit of local content is what most of us understand, because in the content you have issues around employment, issues around training, issues around transfer of technology. But all this should be done in the context of local. That is, you just don't come and say we have got 97% Tanzanians employed in a certain mining operation, but you are saying how many of those are from Geita, how many of those are from Kabanga, Nyamongo, etc., so that you can have a very fair distribution of these things. Now, what you want in participation is trying to get into 75% of turnovers. I told you the leftovers, the maximum you can get in leftovers is 25%. I want to tell you, a good accountant will give you a lot less than that. Most of the times, what is left as so-called profit will be 5%, 10%. Sometimes, if they are greedy, like it was during the late 1990s, early 2000, they will say we have not even broken even, and therefore there is nothing to tax, and they go years without being taxed. And that's what makes a good accountant. Sometimes I wonder why accounting is a legal profession, but it is. A good accountant does that, you know. So you don't get that. And therefore, you cannot say, I want to maximize rent and I will get them. It's very difficult. The base erosion and profit shifting that I've talked about happens even in developed world. In absolute terms, there is more money left in developed world in terms of profit shifting and base erosion than in developing world. So you cannot pretend that you can play around it. So the only way to get into a bigger portion is to fight for the operating cost items and say, what can I get? And I want to propose to you 3 ways to do it through citizen participation. Sometimes back, and I happened to have been with Donald in one of the minings, and we saw big trucks there, and I was so much intrigued by huge tires, very huge, longer than me, taller than me, those tires. And I asked those people, how much are these tires? They told me one tire costs $20,000. And one truck uses 4 of them, and if you assume there is a spare tire, there are 5. In that particular mine, there were about 20 of those trucks. We have got a lot of mine elsewhere. And my question was, could we get into this? That's where I come to present to you about local content and how to go about it. The first question you want to ask, and I propose to you, is we should ask ourselves, can we make this particular thing? Imagine if we could be making those tires, and we are assured of selling 100 tires. By the way, they only last for 3 months. Every 3 months they have to replace them. So imagine if you had the market to that. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, if you start thinking like that, mining does not just remain as one of many sectors, but it's a catalytic sector. We should not look at it in a partial way, but we should think of it in economics we call general equilibrium, that we are using extractive to boost the rest of the economy. Can you imagine if we ask that question, can we make these tires? That question would be answered by the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. All of a sudden, it's no longer about mining, it's about trade, industry and investment. And you go to that ministry and say, you know what, we used to have General Tire here. Can we revive it and make sure that we make these tires? That will be our first question. If it's a truck, you go and call Ministry of Defense and say, you know what, I remember you used to have Nyumbu. Can you make a truck? That's the first entry point. That is, we cannot afford to have some of these items that get into operating costs being imported in our economy. What we do there is exporting jobs, exporting technologies, and what have you. Someone will say we don't have that technology. So I submit to you the second level of engagement and say, can we assemble it? Well, maybe we don't have a technology to make it. Can we assemble it? We go back to General Tire and say, well, you used to make tires. They say you cannot make it, but can you assemble so that at least we don't import a finished product? That's the way to retain tech from this. Ladies and gentlemen, in case even assembling is a problem to us, and that's a curse if you may ask me, you can go to my last point there. Can we attract that relevant FDI in our country? And say, well, we cannot manufacture it, we cannot assemble it, but whoever is manufacturing or assembling it should do it from Tanzania. Why? Because we will keep our jobs, we'll impose all rents that we want, and there will be spillovers of technology from there. That's my proposal to you in terms of how you do that and how you reimagine local content in a way that is practical. So far, I've given you stuff that is wonderful and brilliant. But I want to give you reality, and this reality is called resource curse. In the year 1993, a researcher, economist by the name of Richard Orty looked at different countries, and his interest was to look at economic growth in these countries, hundreds of countries. And he saw a phenomenon that was very interesting. That is, countries that were rich in resources happened to have lower economic growth. And countries that were not had higher economic growth. Now, when he looked at this, what I call a paradox of plenty, he was surprised, because if you are rich in resources, that should aid you into growth. But the opposite was happening. And Richard Orty called it resource curse. It has to be a curse, ladies and gentlemen. If you have got plenty, yet you are nothing, as Donald talked about Equatorial Guinea and elsewhere. Now, to understand resource curse, I want to give you 3 forms it exhibits itself. And I'm about to finish in about 5-10 minutes. The first one is called Dutch disease. The Economist magazine, back in 1977, was the first one to explain this phenomenon. They looked at Netherlands back then. At the time, Netherlands was experiencing boom in natural gas. But as they were looking at this boom in the Netherlands, back in 1970s, they observed that simultaneously, the manufacturing sector in Netherlands and the services sector were declining. And so they started calling it a Dutch disease. That when you have got a boom in some of these natural resources, if you are not careful to engage properly within the sectors and make these sectors catalysts to the rest of the economy, so that these sectors, because they are exhaustive, can only be used to develop the rest of the economies, all they can do is to bring this disease that kills the remaining of the sectors. And that's what happened in the Dutch, and therefore it was called the Dutch disease. You might think that now, because this was the phenomenon that was raised up in 1977, now we know about it and we cannot do it. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a story of Ghana. Prior to discovery of gas in Ghana, Ghana was one of the Pearl of Africa. In fact, if you are talking about countries that were wonderful in terms of democracy, governance, good economy, you mention few countries, one of them will be Ghana. So you mention Botswana, you mention Mauritius, and Ghana, lo and behold, gas was discovered. We'll talk about the story later on if you ask me questions, but after that discovery, things were so messy that as I speak to you, Ghana right now is under administration with the Washington institution. I'm talking about World Bank and IMF. What happened? They were doing fine before the discovery. Dutch disease. Does that remind you that we're about to reach the final investment decision just about this year? And everyone is chest thumping that we have got money, we can borrow whatever we want to borrow because in the south we have got LNG about to come. Ladies and gentlemen, the Dutch disease is no respect of persons. It can hit us as much as it did in 1977, or even as it does now in Ghana. That's the first form of resource curse, Dutch disease. The second form of resource curse is called political patronage. And this is in line with what Donald was talking about here. It so happens that countries that are well endowed with natural resources are cursed in that most of the times they tend to create strong men and strong parties. And after they create strong men and strong parties, these strong men and strong parties tend to use the very natural resources to maintain their grip to power. So it doesn't matter whether you are talking about Ngwema in Equatorial Guinea, or you are talking about Gilberto Bokassa in Central African Republic, or Dos Santos in Angola, or the late Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Azabanga in Zaire. What is happening there is that natural resources create strong men and strong parties, and these strong men and strong parties use the very natural resources in their country not to further development of their people, but to maintain their grip on power. And so the case goes that they no longer care about people, they no longer care about development, but they care about the existence of their power. They care about their parties, they care about their grip to power. In the end, they care about their families. And so they start saying, you know that family? If the family is of leaders, but what is happening is they have got money to bribe and maintain their grip to power. There's the second form of curse that happens. And the last form that happens is called rent-seeking in economics. Rent-seeking is nothing but a way in which individuals or institutions add wealth without providing a reciprocal contribution to productivity. So you're adding wealth, but there's no productivity there to give evidence to that. I'll give you a simple example to understand what rent-seeking is. If you are a contractor and tenders are being...
By way of concluding, Prof.
2 minutes. If you're a contractor and tenders are there, there's a choice there. If you are connected to ruling parties and strong men, you could win all tenders. And so what a rational being or rational institution will do is to invest in patronage, is to invest in connections, and not invest in the way to increase efficiency, to increase productivity. Now, what happens, ladies and gentlemen, is very similar to what is happening in pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes. In that at the beginning there will be a few people who will spend and invest in lobbying activities without investing in productive activities. But there will be a good share of people still being productive, and these will be pushing economy going well. But ladies and gentlemen, as time goes, everyone becomes more intelligent, and they know that being productive doesn't pay. Hard work doesn't pay. And so everyone stops being productive and starts investing in lobbying. At the end of the day, you don't have anyone working hard. You don't have efficiency. You don't have productivity. That's when the house of cards comes tumbling down, and you end up with a curse rather than a blessing, as natural resources should be. Ladies and gentlemen, as I finish, this is what I'm saying. Natural resources need not to be a curse. They can be a blessing. But we have to make a conscious decision to engage. We've got to be part of the game. To be part of the game in terms of using natural resources as catalysts to improving the rest of the economy. If we do not do that, ladies and gentlemen, the curse is waiting for us out there. We'll never avoid it. And here in Tanzania and the rest of Africa, we'll keep on complaining. We have plenty, but we have got nothing to show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Very good. I think that applause says that they have really understood and appreciate your contribution. One thing that I could mention is perhaps it's high time to think about changing this name, Dutch disease, because the Dutch were clever enough to address the challenges and redirect the resources in other sectors of the economy and being able to diversify the economies. But there are countries in Africa that have inherited this disease, and they still don't see that it's a disease. So I think that this should be renamed. And Professor Kiondo, perhaps when responding to some of the questions, you should try to explain, of course, some countries resorted to dealing with the challenge of participation and maximization of rents by going into the mode of production called production sharing agreements. But yet, other countries like the United States and Norway and the Netherlands retained the rent system in which they tax. And perhaps you could explain whether the role of institutions and governance matter, because these countries, while they focus on rent, their government take is close to 70–80%. So maybe you could try to respond to that. And now, my friend from the extreme left, it's my pleasure now to invite you to hear your extreme views. Mr. Sabato Nyamsenda, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mari. I would like first to begin by thanking our Nyagoda, Professor Rekaza Mkandala, for inviting me for the third consecutive year to give a presentation here on behalf of young people. I'm really humbled. Asante sana, Professor. I I think I should also acknowledge because I'm speaking on behalf of the youth, even though I have a student. My student was here, actually, Joseph Marekela, who is even younger than I am. But I should also acknowledge the contribution of young people called Wanakigoda, who work tirelessly from early morning to late evening to put everything in place. I was one of them between 2009 to 2013. And during those days, Kigoda was very rich intellectually, but when it comes to money, it was relatively poor. So we worked entirely pro bono. But we did so with passion because we considered it our duty to contributing to the Pan-African cause. And for those who don't speak Kiswahili, Nyagoda is the Swahili term that we coined here some 10 years ago to mean the holder of the professorial chair. And the chair itself is called Kigoda. And I think it's Dr. Kamata who invented that term. Having said that, with your permission, Doctor, if you allow me, I would like to have some form of a hybrid presentation because I prepared slides and they are in English. So I'll display the slides. And then in the spirit of the previous panel, and because of the topic itself, I would like to present in Kiswahili. Thank you. Permission granted. Au na nyinyi mnataka kushiriki? Wanaosema tutumie Kiswahili waseme ndio. Waliosema ndio wameshinda. So if you are sitting next to our guest, you could probably help translate, but I think most of the slides are self-explanatory. Kwa hiyo mada nitakayowasilisha ni mada inayohusiana na huu mfumo wa soko huria na nafasi ya vijana. Vijana, nadhani Marekela amefanya kazi nzuri kuwasilisha mtazamo wa vijana na kuonyesha vijana gani wameshika nafasi gani, lakini hilo ni kundi moja tu la vijana, na ni wachache kwa kweli kwa idadi yao, ambao wameshika ukuu wa wilaya, ukuu wa mkoa, uwaziri, pengine na sisi tuko vioni tunafundisha na kadhalika. Lakini kwa sehemu kubwa ukiangalia takwimu, kati ya vijana 1,000,000 wanaoingia katika soko la ajira kila mwaka hapa nchini kwetu, ni vijana 40,000 tu wanaoingia katika kinachoitwa sekta iliyo rasmi. Kwa hiyo vijana 960,000 wanabaki mtaani, na wengi wao, na siku hizi mtaa haubagui. Mimi kila ninapoenda sehemu yoyote nakutana na wanafunzi wangu wa chuo kikuu, wengine hata tulikuwa wana masters, ni wa machinga, ni bodaboda na kadhalika. Kwa tunapojadili hatima ya hao vijana wa tabaka la chini, ni vema kujiangalia, kwa sababu kipindi tunachoishi, na nashukuru ndugu zangu wachumi wamewasilisha mada nzuri sana, kipindi tunachoishi ni tofauti sana na kipindi cha mwanzo, ambapo walau uwezekano wa kwamba ukiingia chuo kikuu utaishia kupata ajira iliyo rasmi ulikuwa ni ukubwa uwezekano huo zamani. Sasa hivi ukipata ajira iliyo rasmi ni bahati sana. Uwezekano mkubwa ni kwamba utangukia katika ajira isiyo rasmi kwa namna yoyote ile, maana siku hizi zimeboreshwa. Kuna zingine tumeziboresha siku hizi, vijana unakuta na yaani ukiwa na namba ya mtu, karibu kila mtu ni machinga wa WhatsApp. Huyu anauza mashuka, huyu anauza nguo, huyu anauza na kadhalika, au ni kidogo ambao wanafanyia machinga nyuma. Lakini wengi sana vijana wenye degree wako mtaani na wanapambana, narudi kule kwenye kazi ambazo walizokuwa wakifanya wazazi wao wakati wanawasomesha. Kwa hiyo hii mada ni ya msingi, na ndio maana nimeamua kuiwasilisha kwa Kiswahili, kwa sababu inahusu mustakabali wa vijana wengi. Acha wale wachache, na wote tunaota ndoto hizo, lakini uhalisia ni kwamba labda kama tutabadili mfumo wa uchumi na ili watatusaidia wachumi wetu, uwezekano mkubwa ni kwamba tutaishia huko kutembeza vinguo ama kupitia WhatsApp ama mtaani moja kwa moja. Kwa hiyo sasa ukitazama wananadharia, na hapa nitamchagua mmoja, anaitwa Hernando de Soto. ambaye nataka kumsulubu kidogo kulingana na wajibu wake aliofanya kidunia, lakini katika hii nchi. Ukiwatazama wana nadharia wa hizo sera za soko huria, wanazungumza kwamba, na nadhani profesa ameiwasilisha pale mwanzo, kwamba uwepo wa sera za soko huria unasaidia kiuchumi. Tunakuwa na ukuaji wa uchumi ambao unawafikia watu walio wengi. Kisiasa tunakuwa na mfumo wa demokrasia ambayo inaongeza haki za watu na uhuru na kadhalika. Lakini kama mnavyoona bango langu la kwanza, Dr. Bagonza sijui kama umeliona lile ile picha. The writings in the photo, if I translate them into English, these are street vendors telling a person called mother. They are saying, we are tired. We want our freedom. We street vendors. Tunataka uhuru wetu sisi wa machinga. Na hii imetokea katika kipindi ambacho uhuru umeongezeka, demokrasia imeongezeka, na uchumi tunasema unaenda vizuri kwa sababu nchi imefunguliwa. Lakini huko mtaani kwa wananchi wa kawaida ukienda, hali kidogo ni tofauti. Na nazungumza, lengo langu sio kutarget mtu ama nini, nazungumza swala la kisera, kwa sababu hapa tunatafuta mustakabali wa nchi yetu, na ndio mahali pake hapa kutafuta majawabu kwa maswali yaliyo magumu. Kwa hiyo huyu De Soto anatokea Peru, amefanya kazi nyingi sana. Mwaka 2004 alipata tuzo, na ukiona maneno hapo, nazungumzia liberty, amesaidia and helping the world's poor. Na ni mtu pekee yake ambaye alionyesha kupata suluhisho la kuleta hiki tunachokizungumzia, kuleta balance kati ya ukuaji wa uchumi mkubwa, hiyo macroeconomics, na ukuaji wa uchumi huu mdogo, yani kutafsiri manufaa ya uchumi mkubwa kwenda kwa watu wa tabaka la chini. Kwa hiyo mwaka 2004 aliajiriwa, na nitarudi huko. Aliajiriwa hapa na nchini Tanzania na rais, alipewa consultancy, shauri elekezi, na rais wa awamu ya 4 ya 3 hayati Benjamin Mkapa. Utafiti wake ulikuwa na awamu 2. Awamu ya kwanza ilikuwa ni utafiti, awamu ya pili ya kuleta suluhisho, ukaleta hiyo sera inayojulikana kama Kurabita, mpango wa kurasimisha rasilimali na biashara za wanyonge Tanzania. Na yeye anachosema ni kwamba ukifanya urasimishaji wa biashara za wanyonge unawasaidia kuwaondoa kwa umaskini, kwa sababu wana rasilimali nyingi, lakini hizo rasilimali na mitaji ni mitaji mfu, dead assets, dead capital. Kwa ukizirasimisha, ukizifanya ziwe rasmi, unaziingiza katika mfumo ulio rasmi, maana yake ni kwamba unazibadili kutoka kuwa rasilimali mfu na mitaji mfu kuwa rasilimali hai. Unaona rafiki yangu kutoka NMB hapa, basi ukienda NMB kama una karidhi kako, watakupatia mkopo kwa sababu utakuwa na hati. Kama una biashara yako, watakupatia mkopo kwa sababu ina anwani iliyoeleweka, imesajiliwa na kadhalika na kadhalika. Sasa mimi ninachosema ni kwamba, na hii ndio sera ambayo imekuwa ikiongoza awamu nyingi, isipokuwa kwa upande wa machinga, isipokuwa awamu ya 5. Ila sitawasilisha kuhusu awamu ya 5. Tawasilisha tu kwa sababu ndio sera inayoendelea mpaka sasa hivi kwa sehemu kubwa. Ni kwamba imejengwa katika msingi ambao kwa kweli ni msingi wa uongo. Na hata ukitazama tathmini ambazo ziliandikwa na NORAD, ndio waliofandi huo mradi, wanasema kwanza sehemu kubwa ya wataalamu walitoka nje, 75% ya muda waliutumia wakiwa huko Peru, wala hawakuwa hapa nchini. Halafu De Soto amekuja na assumptions na kila kitu, yani kwamba amekuja yeye kutafuta, ni kama kuthibitisha kitu ambacho alikiweka tayari katika mawazo, lakini hakiendani na uhalisia. Au ni NORAD, ukisoma report yao, evaluation report ya huo mradi. Lakini ukitazama kinadharia, na nitarudi hapa, ni kwamba assumptions za kurasimisha kubwa ni 3. Ya kwanza, inadhani kwamba sekta iliyo rasmi imejitenga kutoka sekta isiyo rasmi. Sasa huu ni uongo. kwa sababu ukienda tu barabarani wakutana na machinga anauza maji, anauza sijui gazeti, bidhaa zote au anauza nguo, ni kwamba vyote hivyo ni vitu ambavyo vimezalishwa katika kinachoitwa viwanda. Kwa hiyo ni vitu vinavyotokea katika sekta iliyo rasmi, si ndio? Ya pili, wanasema kwamba machinga au watu walio katika sekta isiyo rasmi ni wajasiriamali, na nadharia ya De Soto ni kwamba hawa ni mabilionea watarajiwa, yani wapo katika safari ya kuelekea ubilionea. Kwa hiyo wanadhani kwamba watu wote mle waliomo ni wajasiriamali. Sasa mimi nitaonyesha kitu ambacho nimekipata. Na ya tatu of course ni kwamba kinachokubalika ni kwamba sekta isiyo rasmi iondolewe. Sasa kuna njia mbili. Dola kwa muda mrefu limekuwa likitumia mabavu kutimua machinga, simekuwa mkiona hivyo Lakini ya pili, De Soto amekuja na njia ambayo ni ya carrot. Kama dola ilikuwa inatumia stick, amekuja na carrot, kuja na njia hiyo ya urasimishaji. Wapatie, kama mtu ana kashamba kake mama ekari 2, mpe hati, NMB watamuona. Kama mtu ana biashara yake irasimishe, ataenda benki fulani atachukua mkopo. Sasa hizi assumptions tatu zimejengwa katika zote, yani kinadharia. Ukishaanza na nadharia ambayo yani kama ni kipimo, ukienda hospitali unaumwa kichwa, mtu akaenda kupima kipimo akasema akupa dawa ya malaria, wakati hata kipimo halisi sicho hicho, labda una typhoid au una sababu nyingine tofauti akakupa. Kwa hiyo hata dawa anayokupa ni dawa ambayo haitibu ugonjwa kwa asili yake. Na ndio maana hili tatizo limeendelea kuwepo, kwa sababu tumekuja na suluhisho ambalo ni la uongo. Kwa hiyo limesababisha matatizo makubwa kwa vijana wetu kwa miaka mingi sana, na hii sekta inazidi kutanuka, lakini hakuna mbadala. Kwa hiyo sasa kwa hapa chuoni nakumbuka mwaka 2017 tulikuwa na kakundi fulani ka vijana tunajaribu kusoma nadharia za Kimaksi, na mojawapo maandiko tulikuwa tunasoma ni yale ambayo ni classical. Sasa na yenyewe ukiyasoma kuhusu sekta isiyo rasmi utasema hao ni mifumo ya uzalishaji ile ya zamani, ni masalia ya mfumo ya zamani, wanaoita kitabaka au katika tabaka inayoitwa lumpen proletariat. Kwa hiyo hata uelewa wao wa mambo hawana uelewa wa kinadharia wala wa kimapambano, hawako organized na vitu vingine vya aina hiyo. Naona muda unakimbia sana, itabidi nikimbie zaidi. Kwa nakumbuka wakati tuko kwenye hilo darasa, wakati fulani alikuja kijana mmoja ambaye ni fundi ujenzi, alikuwa amechelewa kutoka kazini, lakini akakata siku yake akaja. Sasa amekuja ni mchafu auxiliary hapa akamsumbua kidogo. Kwa hiyo alipokuja darasani mle alikuwa na hasira, na akatuambia kwamba bwana, kuna mambo mawili hapa. Ya kwanza ninayoyazungumza ni mazuri sana, lakini nayazungumza kinadharia sana. Nendeni mtaani mkazungumze na watu. Ya pili, kwa hiyo mhame katika nadharia, mwende muunganishe nadharia na uhalisia wa mtaani. Lakini ya pili, kwa hiyo tuwe na mfumo wa uzalishaji maarifa ambao unatokana na watu wenyewe huko chini. Kwa hiyo hapa nakumbuka hii ilikuwa, unaona hapa nilikuwa mdogo sana, 2017 hapa tulikuwa tumetembelea Ubungo, bado kuna kituo cha mabasi pale, na tumefika pale na dereva wa mabasi walikuwepo, tukawa tunawasikiliza. Kwa hiyo tukwenda kwa upande wa mwajiri, tumeenda kwa madereva. Kwa ukiwakuta hawa ni watu ambao wameajiriwa katika sekta iliyo rasmi, lakini mfumo wao wa ajira ni mfumo usio rasmi. Wengi hawapati mshahara, hawana mikataba, hawana social security, hawana minimum wage, there is no sick leave na kadhalika. Analipwa tu posho anapoendesha basi. Na posho, kwa mfano dereva anayeenda Mwanza na basi na abiria 60 analipwa 20,000. Kama makazi yake yako Dar es Salaam, afike Mwanza, alale guest, ale njiani na kadhalika. Lakini ukiangalia faida ambayo anaitengeneza, wao wenyewe wanatupa calculation kwa sababu wao ndio wanaendesha. Faida ya boss ni karibia milioni, baada ya kutoa gharama zote za uendeshaji, wakati huo ilikuwa ni 1,200,000. Na ndio maana utakuta kulikuwa na migomo, kwa mfano mwaka 2015 utakaoona magazeti, madereva wa mabasi waligoma pale, na wao wanatoa suluhisho lao hapo. Wanasema kwamba kama serikali haiko tayari, basi labda tuanze kuwa na njia ya ushirika ya umiliki kama njia mojawapo ya kudistribute faida kwa watu wengi, badala ya kuwa na mfumo ambao anamiliki mtu mmoja lakini watu wengi hawapati faida. Ya pili, kwa hiyo inatuonyesha aina mojawapo ya informality. Tunaelewana? Usio rasmi, kwamba njia mojawapo ni kwamba hawa wengi pia walio katika sekta isiyo rasmi wameajiriwa katika sekta iliyo rasmi lakini katika mfumo usio rasmi. Kwa ni njia mpya, informalization ni njia mpya ya unyonyaji, ambapo mwajiri hatumiki kama ilivyokuwa zamani, ambapo ukiajiriwa tu mwajiri anakupa guarantees zote, mshahara na haki zingine zote za mfanyakazi, lakini kiuhalisia utakuta hawana haki. Na ndio maana hiyo sekta imekuwa na migomo sana. Madereva maroli kama mnaangalia, madereva mabasi na kadhalika na kadhalika. Ya pili, kwa mfano ukienda bodaboda, kuuliza katika mtazamo wa kawaida bodaboda ni nani, utasema ni kijana ambaye amejiajiri. Lakini maana ya kujiajiri ni nini? Kwa sababu ukienda pia kwao utakuta majority, sehemu kubwa katika vijiwe hawamiliki hizo bodaboda. Wao amepewa bodaboda aendeshe, anapeleka hesabu kwa bosi, ama mkataba ambao mwisho wa mwaka hiyo baada ya bodaboda ikiwa imetumika ndo atapewa, au ni mkataba ule wa siku ambao anapeleka tu hesabu na bodaboda inabaki kuwa ya bosi. Kwa hiyo huu ni mfumo mpya wa ajira ambapo huyu ambaye ni mwajiriwa yeye ndo anayempelekea bosi. Kwa hiyo kitokee chochote barabarani, awe amepata ajali, amekamatwa sijui na askari na trafiki na kadhalika, vyote hivyo bosi havimhusu, si ndio? Katika mfumo wa kawaida, mimi ambaye nimeajiriwa, watu walioajiriwa nafahamu, hasara yoyote ikitokea anayebeba ni mwajiri, sio mfanyakazi. Lakini katika huu mfumo mpya, mfanyakazi ndo anabebeshwa hizo costs, gharama na hasara zozote ambazo zinaibuka katika mfumo mzima wa uzalishaji, na bodaboda inathibitisha hilo. Ya tatu, ukienda kwa kina mama kwa mfano ni wa machinga, na hii sijui screen naonyesha hapa, ni mbunge wa Ubungo tarehe 22 Desemba ameenda huko masokoni, anazungumza na watu na wanamwambia kero kubwa ni mikopo inaitwa kausha damu. Mmeshasikia kausha damu jamani? Na Profesa Roga alikuwa hapa, walifanya kazi kubwa sana katika kipindi chao kwa ile sheria mpya. Kwa hiyo sasa hata ukienda unakuta kina mama wanahangaika, wanaambiwa njoo mchukue mikopo, wanaenda wanachukua mikopo, iwe ni kwenye microfinances na kwingine, lakini unakuta kwa hiyo amehangaika, anauza vikaranga vyake. Riba anaambiwa tu utaleta 3,000 kwa wiki, ajui hata hiyo 3,000 kwa siku. Lakini ukifanya calculation mwisho wa siku amechukua mkopo wa 100,000, amerudisha 3,500. Na ni riba ambayo wengine unaweza kuchukua mkopo wa 100,000, utajikuta mwisho wa siku na mkopo umefika milioni 2, milioni 3. Nataka kumzipo, kuna utafiti ushawahi kufanywa na TAKUKURU, mtu amechukua mkopo wa milioni 1, tena wanategea walimu kwa mfano, alafu anakuja ana deni la milioni 35. Na kadhalika na kadhalika. Kwa hiyo ndio ipo hiyo na watu wanalalamika. Kwa hiyo huo ni uporaji mpya, ni aina mpya ya unyonyaji, ni secondary modes of exploitation, ambayo hata ukifanyaje kazi kuna watu huko wamekufunga kamba, wanavuta lile nani kile faida unayozalisha. Kutoka kina mama kwa mfano Manzese wameunda vikundi vya kupambana na hizo microfinances na baadhi ya mabenki ambayo yanawatoza hizo riba kubwa. Wameunda hivyo vikundi mbadala na wamekuwa wakipambana. Mwenyekiti, naangalia muda na zimebakia dakika chache, lakini namalizia. Kwa ukienda migodini utakuta mifumo hiyo. Kwa mfano unakuta kampuni, hata ukienda kwa makampuni makubwa ya simu, sijui Vodacom, wapi ukuta dada mzuri kaajiriwa kama customer care, sio mfanyakazi wa kampuni ile husika, ni mfanyakazi ameajiriwa na third company. Hapa kwetu chuo kwa sababu kila unapoenda sehemu yoyote ukishika kitu chochote kimezalishwa na nguvu kazi. Kishika simu hii, kuna watu wanakufa migodini Kongo ili madini yaende, kuna watu China, iPhone hizi China wanakufa, Google Foxconn, watu wanajirusha kutoka kwenye maviwanda yanao assemble hizi. Kwa hiyo kuna nguvu kazi inayotumika kuzalisha. Kwa hiyo usiangalie tu bidhaa, angalia nyuma yake kuna nguvu kazi. Kwa hiyo hapa kwa mfano una utafiti, hii ni mazao ya kitafiti. Hapa chuoni kwa mfano, mfumo wa zamani wa ajira kwa wafanya usafi ulikuwa ni kwamba ni waajiriwa wa chuo, kwa anakuwa na benefits zote. Anakuwa na mshahara ambao ni wa chini, lakini anakuwa na benefits zote. Baadaye kupitia huu mfumo wa outsourcing, wasema ili kuwe na ufanisi zaidi, tulete makampuni binafsi ya ajili yenyewe ndio yashughulike usafi, chuo kishughulike na nini, na cafeteria hivyo hivyo na kadhalika. Sasa tafiti ambazo zimefanyika na Dr. Mnisi kwa mfano yuko hapo, utafiti wake umeonyesha ni kwamba moja, chuo kinatumia gharama mara 2 zaidi kuliko ambavyo kingetumia katika mfumo wa zamani ambavyo kingewaajiri moja kwa moja. Lakini ya pili, sehemu kubwa ya faida inaenda kwa wamiliki wa makampuni. Kwa ukikuta kwa wafanya usafi wengi mshahara wake ni shilingi 80,000, kampuni inayolipa mshahara mkubwa ni shilingi 100,000. 100,000 upeo unaweza kuishi. Kwa hiyo unakuta huu ni mfumo mpya wa ajira ambao sasa hawa wameajiriwa katika sekta iliyo rasmi, lakini kwa ajili ya kuleta ufanisi. Lakini kusema ukweli ni kwamba ni nguvu kazi zinanyonywa, iwe ni katika sekta iliyo rasmi ama isiyo rasmi. Kwa hiyo hitimisho ambalo najaribu kulisema hapa, nitahama kuhusu dola la kiliberali mamboleo, lakini nitataka kusema hapa kwenye dola hili jipya katika mfumo huu ni kwamba sisi hatuyaoni haya, kwa sababu jinsi hili dola lilivyo, ni mwanazoni mmoja aliita kama centos. Dola niliona kwenye dictionary wanasema kentauri, central state. Huyu ni mnyama wa zamani, huku juu ni binadamu, chini ni mnyama. Sasa linavyodili na middle classes na upper classes, linadili nao kwa lugha ya kibinadamu, human rights, sijui nini. Linapodili huko chini, hili dola ni kinyama, sawa? Na mfano mmoja wapo takuonyesha. Mama kama huyu amekaa anauza karanga yake kwa mtoto wa shule. Dola linakuja linamwambia, mama, tumekujengea nyumba nzuri sana huko Machinga Complex, nenda floor ya 5. Kodi utalipa 1,500,000. Hapa umeziba barabara, na hayuko barabarani, umeziba barabara, kodi 1,500,000 Machinga Complex. Huna mtaji, kachukue mkopo benki. Ndo nadharia ya Desoto hiyo, mkurabiti. Kwa hiyo akienda huyu mwanafunzi utamhamisha umpeleke floor ya 5 akanunue karanga. Na wauliza, utamhamisha hapa njia ya shule, anapopita njiani anamkuta mama ananunua karanga pale, ili apande floor ya 5 Machinga Complex akanunue karanga? Sasa akikataa huyu mama, nini kinachotokea? Bomoa na anaporwa au anakamatwa. Na kuna mahakama kabisa maalum ya kuwahukumu hao. Hizo mahakama ya jiji haiendeshwi katika mfumo wa kikawaida wa kimahakama na kadhalika. Sasa mwenyekiti amenivumilia sana na sitaki kuvunja uaminifu, na hitimishi. Kwa ukitazama hiki ambacho tunayojifunza hapa ni kwamba huu mfumo mpya kiuchumi, mfumo wa uliberali mamboleo au soko huria, moja, lile tabaka la zamani la wafanyakazi wanaoajiriwa kulipwa mishahara inayoeleweka na kadhalika ni dogo sana. Sehemu kubwa ya mfumo wa ajira ni mfumo wa ajira zisizo rasmi, precarization, labor precarity. Kwa hiyo ni ajira zisizo rasmi, iwe ni mtu kaajiriwa katika sekta iliyo rasmi au sekta isiyo rasmi. Na huko ndani sasa kuna unyonyaji kama nilivyoonyesha ulio kithiri. Lakini pia tumeona kwamba katika hii inayoitwa sekta isiyo rasmi wamekuwa pia wakiungana, wakipambana na wakitoa ndoto za nini kifanyike katika mfumo mpya. Kwa hiyo katika haya majaribu ya kujaribu kwa upande wangu, na hii ndo slide ya mwisho kabisa mwenyekiti, ni kwamba haya mahitimisho ulikuwa sasa ni mfumo mzima mpya wa kuzalisha maarifa. Hizi sauti nilizikusanya kwa sauti zao wenyewe, kwa makala zimeandikwa na bodaboda na wamachinga na hao wengine madereva wa mabasi, sio wafanyakazi wa migodini. Kwa hiyo kwenye hicho kitabu ambacho kinaitwa Wavuja Jasho dhidi ya Soko Huria, ni kitabu kisichouzwa. Ukigoogle tu hilo jina mtandaoni kitakuja, utakidownload, utaweza kujisomea kuhusu madhila ya hao wavuja jasho. Lakini cha muhimu zaidi ni kwamba kwa sababu tunazungumzia habari ya decolonization, kinabadili mfumo wa maarifa kutoka moja, sisi wasomi kuwa peke yetu ndio tunaozalisha maarifa, lakini kinaleta maarifa kutoka chini kwa watu wenyewe. Kwa hiyo mfumo mpya wa uzalishaji maarifa. Lakini pili, kwa kutumia hayo maarifa tunaweza kuyatumia pia kutanua nadharia zetu, kama sisi ambao ni extreme left kama profesa alivyozungumza. Bado ukitumia hayo maarifa kutoka chini, haya ninayozungumza ni maarifa ambayo yamezalishwa kutoka chini, na ninadhani kwamba tukiyatumia tunaweza tukaja sasa na sera mpya ambazo zinaweza zikajibu mahitaji halisi ya wafanyakazi katika nyakati za sasa. Asante mwenyekiti.
Asante sana. Asante sana Mr. Sabato. After all haikuwa very extreme. Lakini pia nilikuongezea muda kidogo kwa sababu ulikuwa una translate kwenda Kiswahili. Na inanikumbusha kitabu kilichoandikwa na Profesa Mateo Rizzo wa SOAS. Alifanya study hapa miaka 8 iliyopita. Title yake ni Life is War. Alikuwa anaangalia mahusiano kati ya wamiliki wa daladala na madereva na kuangalia kwa nini behavior za madereva wa daladala ziko vile. Kwa hiyo nadhani baadhi ya majibu tumepata kwenye kitabu chako. Nakushukuru sana. Nashukuru sana kwa washirikishaji mada wote. Tuna dakika 25 kulingana na ratiba. Kwa hiyo pengine tutumie dakika 20 kwa maswali. Alafu dakika 5 itakayobaki nitaigawa kwa watu wa mada waweze kujibu kama kutakuwa kuna maswali yamekuwa directed kwao. Asanteni sana. Let me see where I start. I see 4 hands. Nitaanza kwa mama hapa, upendeleo kidogo. Mama wa pili atafuata, na hapo nyuma kuna mikono mitatu. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, our great panel. Sarah Sally from Makerere University. My question goes to Mr. Sabato. On your second last slide, do we need to really re-theorize neoliberalism, or we need an alternative model of development? Thank you.
Madam there, behind the chair.
Hello everyone. I'm a student of political science. I have a question to the first presenter.
Can you pull your mic close to you so that people can...
All right. Okay. I have a question to the first presenter. Are we over-optimistic on the role of democracy in bringing development, and too pessimistic on authoritarian leadership? And is there a need to be pragmatic on these notions?
Thank you. There are 3 hands just behind the madam, and then itakuja kwa baba askofu. Behind you there, yeah, yes. Mr. there, and then mzee Juma pale.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Ali Khairi Ahmed. I'm a student here at Judaism, and I'm doing finance. First, I would like to say I'm very thrilled with the presentation of the professor here, Abel Kinyondo. I salute you, sir. I was speaking to somebody a few days ago. He told me, do you know what they call them? Doctor of philosophy. It means that they have reached the highest level of reasoning. And today I've seen the true embodiment of reasoning and intellect and competence. I salute you so much. And that was the appreciation part. But from what I see from what you have been presenting, it's like you are subscribing to what our pioneering father, the one we see in the picture, we do love him so much. He really used to resent privatization. He was speaking to the press the days before the election in 1995, and he really cast the private sector. He told them it needs nursing. It really do need nursing. It's not something that you just leave your economy to a private sector, because it's really a tough thing to control. And he even kind of insulted someone who asked the question by giving her this notion. He told that woman that the 7 countries, the Great 7, are going to discuss in Halifax in June. Do you think what are they going to do? To drink tea? They are going to discuss the economy and how to control it in a holistic manner. So what you did is a very good thing. Now I'm raising a question on what you said. We should put ourselves into this, the turnover things, and not relying on profit only. So just thinking, there is something called economical espionage. We really have to be good in lobbying and things like that. The companies which are supplying the things that these extractive companies are using are highly competitive companies. I was thinking, are we ready for that? I'm not underpinning our country. I'm just saying, are we ready for the mindset that will be needed and the kind of negotiations that we really have to go through in the table until we win this kind of businesses that you are proposing? Have you thought, you as scholars, the kind of positions and mindset we should be keeping ourselves into so that we can win that? That was a very good thing. Thank you. My name is Ali Khairi. I'm a Minister of Finance in Darusso. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Please pass the mic behind you. And then we come to the Bishop.
Thank you, Prof. I wish to thank Prof. Abel Kinyondo. And I have a question to him that has been keeping me paralyzed since I heard these 2 terminologies. The 2 are brat and trat. We couldn't get the answer because someone interrupted this and asked what was brought in the chart, and the answer was yeah, 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 to the end. That's my question, Prof. Abel Kinyondo. I'm sorry, I wanted to say Alfred Kinyondo. No, it's Abel Kinyondo. The second question goes to the first presenter. He gave us a list of countries that were doing fine, and in the list put Tanzania, and the West was Burundi. Where is Nigeria in this list? Because the GPA in Nigeria is higher than Tanzania. The population is higher than Tanzania and the other countries, I think, on population matters. Now my question is, where is Nigeria to this list? Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Bagonza. Then I've seen other hands. Bishop.
Yep. I would like to thank all of the presenters, and I have two maybe comments, but one is general. I'm sorry, my mtani, I'm sender. I don't see soko huria in this country. I rather see soko horera, and why is that? Takes me to the presentation by Professor Kinyondo. This country, we are facing the wrath of overregulation. And overregulation breeds stagnation, corruption, and then we end up externalizing the resources and the capital, which leaves the majority on the bottom of the ladder, rather poorer and poorer every day. And therefore, even the Far East example of the tigers in Asia that we referred to, Professor Kinyondo, they did not regulate before investment. Who was doing that? Yes, yeah. They invested, they invested and then they went into regulation. But here we have done it opposite side. We have actually not regulated, but over-regulated, and therefore, even those who managed to squeeze themselves and invest here, they have gone through a lot of corruption and then ended up really disappointed. And therefore, even the spillover to the masses down, it doesn't get there. They do it quickly so as to get something that they have invested in, and then externalize it. And therefore, probably I would highly recommend that we look into this regime of the overregulation in the country. The second comment is, somebody talked about the elimination of scarcity. Yes, under the Soko Horera, we have managed to eliminate scarcity of goods, but at the expense of disempowering the masses to access those things that have come at the expense of elimination of scarcity. And therefore, we have a lot of spectators of economic growth. Economic growth in this country is just a myth. It's not a reality. We have spectators of that economic growth. And eventually, we have ended up creating an unhealthy competition between the federal government and the local government in terms of competing to impose revenues, the so-called tozos, to the masses. We who come from to the rural areas, you see that competition in reality. Every 5 kilometers there is a roadblock, people are taxing even one single ananas, you know. apple or something like that. And that does not create economic growth on the bottom. So it's just a myth. And without solving that problem, the masses down on the ladder of the economic will remain deprived. Thank you so much.
Asante sana, Bishop. Let me, to be fair, take 2 questions from this side, 2 questions from this side, and 2 questions from the back. Let me start with this side. 2 hands I see. Yes. And then we'll see if we have time for more questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. Kwa majina naitwa Ndolezi Petro, ni waziri kivuli wa sekta maji na mazingira kutoka chama cha ACT Wazalendo. Kama kijana nimeguswa na mada kadhaa zilizokuwa zikiendelea. Moja ni juu ya uwasilishaji wa Profesa Symbolic Kiondo juu ya uchumi na namna gani tunakwama kulikwamua taifa letu. Lakini mbili ni namna ambavyo Nyamsenda alivyowasilisha changamoto za uhalisia wananchi na vijana tunazozipitia. Na tatu, kuna kijana mwenzangu Marichela alikuwa anakizungumzia juu ya vijana kuhusishwa kwenye maamuzi mbalimbali kwenye serikali. Na imekuwa ni mara kadhaa kwenye mijadala mingi tunakuwa tukidemand vijana tuwe sehemu ya process ya kimaamuzi. Sasa mimi binafsi niweze kuambia vijana wenzangu tulioko hapa na wengine kama natusikiliza, ni wajibu na ni wakati wetu sisi vijana kuchukua maamuzi ya kuingia kwenye process. Cha kutaka kuelewa cha kwanza ni moja, mwelewe watu walioko madarakani wako kwenye power. Inavyokuwa inaitwa ni power, haiwezi kuwa rahisi kupewa fursa kuingia katika nafasi hizo. Na ndio maana utaona licha ya kwamba tuna sheria ya vijana iliyotupatia Baraza la Vijana la Taifa la Tanzania mwaka 2014 hadi leo halipo. Ni kwa sababu anajua tukiungana na kwa changamoto zetu tulizonazo tutakuwa tuna uwezo mzuri wa kuondoa kwenye nini? Kwenye power. Waliweza kina Nyerere akiwa na miaka 39 Tanganyika ikapata uhuru. Lakini pia tumepata story ya Ahmed Salim, alikuwa na miaka 22 na aliweza kuaminika kuwa balozi wa Egypt. Kwa hiyo hata sisi tunaweza tukaanzisha michakato ya kuidai katiba mpya ambayo itakayotupatia mfumo. Katiba mpya ndio itakayotupatia mfumo ambao ukatuondolea hii system ya kwa sasa. Ili kupata kitu fulani unahitaji nini? Connection. Ili kubidi tenda, ili we mkurugenzi wa TPA lazima uwe na nini? Na connection. Kwa hiyo tukililei kwenye connection tunaondoa ile expertise, ule utaalamu, tunabaki kuingia kwenye sasa hivi kitu tunakiita uchawa. Unatondolea ule utaalamu. Kwa hiyo sisi vijana ni wajibu na wakati wetu sasa kuingia katika process, kudimandi mifumo ambayo itatupa ule uwezekano wa kukwamuka kiuchumi na kimaendeleo kama taifa. Asante sana.
Asante sana, nyuma yako.
Jina langu naitwa Hussein Mashaka, ni mwanafunzi wa mwaka wa kwanza na chuo Political Science and History. Mimi nilikuwa na mawazo alafu mwisho nina swali. Swali langu, mawazo yangu yalikuwa ni juu ya mustakabali wa soko huria na mawazo ya Mwalimu Nyerere. Kuna mmoja muuliza swali alikariri sehemu ya hotuba Mwalimu Nyerere ya mwaka 1995 aliyetoa Kilimanjaro Hotel kuhusu athari za soko huria. Nchi zetu zimekuwa zikikumbatia sana mfumo wa soko huria katika kivuli cha demokrasia. Matokeo yake tumekuwa tukiua vya kwetu kwa sababu vya nje tunaviona vina gharama nafuu. Athari yake mataifa yetu yamekuwa yakitumia fedha nyingi kuagiza vitu kutoka nje wakati viwanda vya ndani vikiwa vinakufa. Hii imekuwa ni athari namba moja. Hivyo basi imekuwa ikileta athari kwamba vijana wengi wanakosa ajira katika sekta kama za viwanda, kwa sababu wengi sana sasa hivi tumejikita katika uchuuzi, kwamba tunanunua China kwa bei nafuu, tunauza hapa kwa bei ya juu. Hatuzalishi, kila kitu tunategemea kutoka nje. So nchi zetu inabidi kuingia katika mikopo mikubwa ya fedha za kigeni ili tuweze kuengage katika soko la kimataifa kununua bidhaa. Lakini pili, ni kuhusu Dr. Nyamsenda. Mimi nimepata bahati ya kumfahamu kabla sijafika hapa kupitia hicho kitabu alichosema cha Wavuja Jasho. Nimesoma sana mawazo yake. Kusema kweli kitabu ambacho tukisoma kinakutia hasira ya kuchukia unyonyaji dhidi ya matabaka ya juu kwa matabaka ya chini. Lakini pia ni kuhusu, nataka kujua mustakabali kama wa chuo. Mimi na mwaka mmoja hapa, lakini hii ni kongamano la kwanza ambalo kubwa linahusisha kutoa tu mawazo, kufikiria. Kwa maana mimi nakuja hapa kujifunza. Na hapa ukiangalia wanafunzi tuko wachache sana ambao tumehudhuria. Je, chuo kama chuo ama idara ina mustakabali wa muda mrefu wa kuandaa midahalo kama hii iwe mingi chuoni ili iweze kufungua uwezo mkubwa wa wanafunzi, kwa sababu hata ukiangalia mapinduzi ya Urusi ilianza elimu ndio akafuata mapinduzi. Yani Lenin alitoa kitabu cha Imperialist High Stage of Capitalism alafu ndio akafuata mapinduzi. Alafu ukiangalia mapinduzi ya Cuba ilianza kitabu kwanza cha Fidel Castro cha History Will Absolve Me alafu ndio akafuata mapinduzi. Hivyo basi kama chuo wana malengo gani ya muda mrefu wa kufungua vijana mawazo katika midahalo kama hii ili uweze kuengage moja kwa moja katika mabadiliko ya umma?
Asante sana. Upande huu. Yes, hapo. Kulikuwa kuna mkono mwingine upande huu kule mwisho, nitachukua mmoja kule mwisho baada ya wewe, alafu tutakuja katikati pale mwisho, alafu kama tutakuwa na muda lakini sina hakika sana. Haya, endelea.
Asante sana mwenyekiti. Mimi naitwa Richard Mbunda. Nimeguswa kidogo na niko concerned, ndio maana nimenyosha kidole sana. Nitaka kumuuliza Profesa Alikaeli kwa sababu wakati anafanya wasilisho alivyoitamka Tanzania alitamka kama low middle income country, ingawaja labda hakutoa muendelezo sana. Sasa concern yangu mimi ni kwamba unaposema Tanzania ni low middle income country, kwa maana ya kwamba imegraduate kutoka kwenye status ya awali, na hapa tupo chuo kikuu cha Dar es Salaam, Dr. Askofu Bagonza alisema ni lazima tuanze kwanza kujenga uelewa wa pamoja. Sasa nadhani assumption yako unatumia ripoti ya World Bank ya mwaka 2020 ambayo ilitamka kwamba Tanzania tumegraduate kwa GNI per capita ya dola za Kimarekani 1121. Lakini mwaka mmoja baadaye 2021 kuna Committee for Development Policy, hao ndo wana mamlaka ya kufanya review ya low income countries na kurecommend for graduation. Walifanya review na wakasema nao wanatumia vigezo vitatu, achilia kimoja kinachotumika na World Bank. Kuna GNI per capita na wakasema tuna per capita income, GNI per capita ya dola 1031, na ili tu graduate tunatakiwa tuwe na GNI per capita ya dola 1222 na hatujafika huko. Sawa Na ili tu graduate kwa income pekee lazima tuwe na USD 2444. Kwa hiyo kigezo hicho hatukugraduate. Na wao wanafanya review kila baada ya miaka mitatu. Lakini kigezo cha pili wanachotumia ni Human Asset Index, ambapo wanasema hatujafikia level ya graduation. Na cha tatu ni Economic Vulnerability Index. Sasa mimi nataka nimuulize Profesa Alikaeli kwa sababu najua atakuwa ni member wa Economic Society of Tanzania, na hili swali limezua mjadala bungeni na nje ya bunge. Tutoke na jibu gani kutoka kwa nyinyi economists kwamba tumegraduate au hatuja graduate? Asante.
Asante sana Dr. Mura. Kule nyuma kabisa kuna mkono.
Thank you very much, Professor Abel Nyondo. I keenly listened to your presentation, and I was eagerly waiting at the very end of your presentation when you mentioned that there is a conscious decision to avoid resource scarcity is required. And I was eagerly waiting to hear what is that kind of conscious decision. Maybe in your response, please come clear, what should be done to get out of here. Second to Sabato Kenda, and again at the end you said that a new policy is required kutoka hapa tulipo. Then ukusema, what is your proposition? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two questions from the students back there. I saw your hand, yes. Very short, yeah?
Swali langu nasema hivi, kwenye discussant wa mwisho alisema kwamba mkuabita ni mfuko ambao ni wa uongo na akaeleza sababu zake. Sasa nilikuwa nasema kama ni wa uongo inamaanisha serikali inatumia au itumii. Kama inatumia nataka nijue inatumia katika njia rasmi au isiyo rasmi. Hivyo tu.
Kulikuwa kuna mkono mwingine hapo kwa wanafunzi. Naomba nione mkono. Ni kule. Haya, mpe yule kule. Alafu tumalize, naona muda sina tena zaidi.
Habari za mchana kila mmoja alikuwa hapa. Kwa majina naitwa Abdulkarimu Ali Ndende. Kutokea shule ya sekondari Kiparanganda. Mimi nilikopo sina swali ila nina maoni. Maoni yangu yapo hivi. Tukizungumzia kwa ngazi ya kijiji, ngazi ya demokrasia kwa upande ngazi ya kijiji, tunazungumzia vijana, yani kwa ngazi ya kijiji. Kwa ngazi ya kijiji, kamati ya kijiji wanapojadili masuala ya kimaendeleo, wanakuwa wanajadili kama kamati, wanakuwa hawapi vijana nafasi ya kuzungumza au kuchangia mawazo yao. Japo inawezekana kwamba kijiji kina rasilimali nyingi, lakini kutokana na vijana kutokupata nafasi ya kuchangia maoni yao au kuzungumza katika kamati ya maendeleo yanayohusu upelekea katika vijiji kutokuwa na maendeleo. Hivyo basi tunapozungumzia maendeleo tunaanzia ngazi ya chini, manake ngazi ya kijiji. Ili mradi tuweze kuwa na maendeleo ya nchi, lazima kwanza tuangalie maendeleo ya kijiji yanapoanzia. Haya ndio maoni yangu.
Asante sana. Kwa kweli naona mikono, bado kuna mikono, lakini ili tuweze kutoa nafasi, mama umeng'ang'ana sana, nusu sekunde, na kwa sababu tu mama hawajaongea, mama wengi, I want to balance. Naomba utumie muda mfupi ili tuweze kuwaruhusu wenzetu waweze ku.
Kwa jina naitwa Margaret Mwita, kutokea chama cha UDP. Mimi naenda kwa Sabato Nyamsenda. Sabato Nyamsenda ametugusa kina mama na jamii yote. Ameona mikopo tunavyonyanyasika wa kina mama ambao tunaongeza kipato kwenye familia. Mikopo hii, yani kuanzia hata simu ya mkononi. Simu ya shilingi 100,000 unakopeshwa kwa 600,000, ulipe kidogo kidogo. Siku ambayo hujapeleka hela, hujaweka hela 1,000 haiongei. Vitu hivi wataalamu wetu mnaona tunavyoingiziwa vitu vya kutunyonya jasho letu. Yaani kila tukigusa huku ni jasho. Tukienda benki au mikopo hiyo sijui ya asa, unatoa hela kabla hujapewa hela. Wakati unapewa hela unabaki na 400,000 kwa 600,000, wewe umeshatanguliza hela. Wanakula hela yako ambayo wewe ungefanya mtaji, kukudanganya wanakupa 600,000, wakati ukipiga hesabu unakuta una 400,000. 400,000 hii unataka kuilipa zaidi. Ndugu Nyamsenda, umetazama kwa madaladala wale wanaolalamika, lakini mimi ningekushauri urudi kwa wale walalamikiwa. Wao wanasemaje? Na nani amewapa madaraka makubwa haya ya kuweza kuwanyonya wanyonge?
Asante sana. Nadhani nafasi yako niliyokupa
na nyongeza.
Naomba tumalize hapo.
Nyongeza ni wanafunzi wa chuo kikuu. Wanafunzi watoto wetu wanasoma. Serikali inachukua nguvu kubwa sana kuwasomesha kwa mtaji wa serikali. Je, vyuo hivi vinatoa wahitimu wengi? Wanajua wanakoishia? Tunabaki na watoto mitaani. Kwa nini bodi hiyo inayowawezesha wakasoma? Kwa nini bodi hii siwawezeshe hata kuwakopesha mapikipiki wanapokuwa wamepotea mtaani? Serikali hajachukua kiwango chote.
Asante mama, nadhani wamekusikia. Naomba tumalizie hapo. Mawazo mazuri sana, lakini naomba tumalizie hapo kwa sababu ya muda.
Kwa hiyo tunasomesha watoto wafu, alivyosema Nyamsenda, ni mradi mfu, kwa sababu unatumia hela nyingi, alafu huyu mtu unambwaga mtaani ulikomtoa. Sasa wewe unapataje faida? Mwanangu mimi hajapata kazi, bodaboda ananyonywa, mkopo ule tuliochukua tunaurudishaje?
Nadhani imeeleweka. Nashukuru sana.
Amen.
Asante sana. May I take this opportunity to invite the presenters? We have had very, very good views. I apologize I could not take as many hands. Very good session. Let me ask each presenter to take 2 minutes each to focus on the question, and then we close. Many views that I'm sure Mwalimu Nyerere chair have taken them, and the team zitakwenda kufanyiwa kazi kwa wale ambao ni wahusika. Professor, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Let me make a sort of summary, but also attempting to respond to the questions. I think I begin with one question that you raised on countries that have been doing good in terms of, well, growth. They have more resources, but they don't seem to break through in terms of human development. Equatorial Guinea was mentioned in Nigeria. But let me simply mention this, that is growth dividend as a reality automatic, that once the country is growing, then automatically there is human development that is entailed? The answer is no. But growth is necessary, however, it is not sufficient. Just to make it short like this. And I'm saying growth can make positive dividend under ideal conditions. To underline that, under ideal conditions. What does it mean? It simply tells us that, you know, if you want growth to make it, then you have to have some fundamentals on the ground. I mentioned saying this, that you need skilled people, but also you actually need discipline. So when you are growing, you also have to ask yourself that, do you observe that the discipline is observed in the leadership and the workforce? But also, the other thing very important to put in mind, people are used to being led. They are led to their destinations. Do you have leadership and administration that is leading you to your development destination? If that is missing, and you know that most of countries that transformed, they actually have names that are attached to people who transformed their countries, then you need to know that we need transformers. So what matters is not only the resources and everything. I mentioned the issue of norms and institutions, institutional infrastructure. So it's not only that the growth is happening, but also is institutional infrastructure available. If it's not available, do not expect a lot of outcomes in terms of the social development, social outcomes, etc. Those are things that are part and parcel. If you are having high growth, but income distribution, the issue of equity is not considered. Tax rates, like we are mentioned, I mean, tax GDP to tax to GDP ratio is low, like Dr. Murray mentioned. You will not realize the dividend of growth. So it is not only a matter of growth, but growth and ideal conditions. Growth is a means. There are other ingredients that should go part and parcel with growth for you to realize human development. I want to put this into perspective so that we don't just take it like once we are growing, then automatically we'll realize the dividend of it. It is important that these other things be part and parcel of it. Now, regarding question as to whether we need to be optimistic or whatever, or pessimistic, indeed, is not a matter of being optimistic or pessimistic. It's a matter of making sure that the things happen in reality the way they should. We know we have a number of resource-rich economies in Africa, Cameroon, DRC, Zimbabwe, Tanzania as well. We are not too poor in that area. Whatever we think, whatever optimism or pessimism we may have, except we are able to transform such resources into quality of life through growth that is going to trickle down to reduction of poverty, things will not happen anyhow different from what we see. This is important to just mention. The other question about why I did not bring Nigeria into the picture, indeed, I did not see the reason, because my point was to make comparison of countries that are doing the best, but in the recent years, and of course, some countries that have not been able to make it that way. Yeah, they are still low, and some countries that have done it relatively well. Not as good, but they are doing a good job, like I mentioned, Mauritius. And of course, Tanzania is my own country, and of course that will be relevant to be there. So Nigeria, despite its income, it doesn't make, doesn't qualify in my sample selection, so to speak. But also I would like to say about countries' categorization into the middle income, low, high, and its politics. I wouldn't really involve myself so much in terms of resolving whether Tanzania is really there. There are different institutions that are rating, different individuals that are rating. Whatever the case, wherever you are placing yourself, the point is you be able to grow, and from your growth you are able to improve quality of life of your people and translate it into what I mentioned as human development and longevity of life. Once you realize that your people's lives or quality of the standards of living is increasing, and you see them even living longer, from their own, in first place, from their own effort before you pray and God helps you to live longer, then once you have this, you are appreciating the level of development and growth you are realizing. So generally to mention is, I wouldn't put a lot of effort to see whether the World Bank placing is the right one, or these other guys that need us to go to over 2,000. But I would put my effort to looking at, are we transforming in a way that is going to, at the end of the time, translate into a better quality of lives of our people, and even increasing the longevity of our lives. Once we realize that, would say growth has dividend. But to put it as my last word, whether we need or we do not need, growth is necessary, nevertheless is insufficient. These are the ingredients of poverty reduction and growth and development that I mentioned have to be part and parcel. I mentioned about institutions, norms, etc. I think this is part of it. I mentioned about skills of our people. Do you have skills that are sufficient to make it health and discipline of your workforce, etc.? Let me not reiterate, but those are part and parcel of what should be coming together with the growth that we are realizing to see development in terms of human development in wide perspective is achieved. Asante.
Professor Keynote, please.
Thank you, Donald. Questions were many. I hope I can do that in a short time. You started by saying the Dutch has moved on. Maybe we should change the name from Dutch disease. But Donald, Africa has been associated with wars and death and everything. Can't we find something bad about the West and call them disease or something? Maybe we call it American disease. One thing I agree with you is that institutions matter. And I was very surprised yesterday, a very prominent man, Rostam Aziz, came and talked about many things, and young men went into online platforms and started talking about non-issues really. But if you listen to him very careful, you realize that he was actually saying we have got very weak institutions here. That someone from up there can call a judge to determine a verdict from the court, that someone from the opposition can be bribed even into being made an ambassador so that they can sabotage their parties. These are real issues that should really show that we have got a long way to go in terms of our institutions, and I thought the discussion should go in that direction. So yes, institution matters. Unfortunately, we don't have them. Mzee wangu ameulizia kuhusu TRAB and TRAT. These ones are quasi-judicial tax appeal bodies. So if you are given a tax invoice by TRA and you are not happy with that, you can appeal a TRAT, which is Tax Revenue Appeal Tribunal, and the sister organization to that is Tax Revenue Appeal Board, which is TRAP. So these are quasi-judicial tax bodies. Askofu talked about taxation, we are overtaxing. Again, that shows how lazy we are as policymakers in this country. We think the more we tax, the better, but that's very contradictory in its very way, because if you want more revenue, you have to widen the tax base. And the way to widen the tax base is to leave the mamamboga grow slowly unto the point where she graduates into a taxpayer that you can pay. What we do is to overtax the person that is already paying taxes, and that's very counterproductive. So it's one of those lazy ways our policymakers misallocate resources that we give them to do it. The last question was, what was the solution to avoid resource cuts? I think I said it. I said at the macro level, what you need is to use resources as catalysts to improve the rest of the sectors. If you don't want a Dutch disease, you should look at mining, you should look at oil and gas, not as a sector that is growing in silos, but as a sector that should be used to boost the rest of the sectors. Because minerals and gas, these ones are exhaustive. Most of them have got lifespan of 30 years, so they will be done at some point. So what you want to do is to have policies that will ensure that for the time they last, they will be boosting manufacturing, agriculture, health sector, etc., etc. But I told you also, and I proposed to you 3 levels of engagement, that we should start thinking, how can we engage our citizens? Can we allow them to manufacture? Can they assemble? Can we attract FDI if we cannot? Because by doing so, we are going to attract FDI that will have spillovers to the rest of the economy. What we want is sustainable development, and sustainable development comes with what we can sustain over a long period of time. These minerals, these resources are exhaustive, and therefore we have to sustain what can stay longer. It's about skills, it's about technology, about value addition. If we can sustain this, even if a plant dies, they can transfer their skills into something else, because a skill is something that is more permanent. So those are the solutions that I gave. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer all the questions, but if I combine Sarah's question and the question from this side, on whether or not we should re-theorize neoliberalism or we need an alternative model. So I wasn't necessarily developing an alternative model. Before we develop an alternative model, we need to understand the existing model. So that's what I was trying to do. And in general, I was making 2 arguments, suggesting 2 shifts basically from the presentation. One, we need to now shift from talking about informal capital paid entrepreneurs to talking about informal labor, because that's the dominant form of informality in the country. And the other, we need another shift from top-down models of knowledge production, but also policy making, to bottom-up. And that's what I was trying to do, and that book I was talking about is actually an example of that. And when you go into that now, you'll get now suggestions from the people themselves, the working people themselves, whether it's about cooperatives as an alternative mode of ownership, whether it's about, like, so many alternatives. And there's a lot of wealth of knowledge if we engage the working people in the day-to-day interactions. Now, mwenyekiti, kwa sitajibu maswali mengine ya mjadala uendelee, ila kwa ruksa yako naomba nisome shairi ambayo niliandika 2020 nusu wiki hiki kama sehemu ya hitimisho. Nusu dakika. Mumbai hadi Bunda wamegeuzwa punda, wabebeshwa mizigo na kulipwa vipigo. Kule Kariakoo wanazibua vyoo, kinyesi cha warukia, maradhi ya wangukia. Viwandani wamejazana, wazee hata vijana, bidhaa wanazalisha, bepari mtajilisha. Ukienda migodini, wanazama ardhini, yajapo maporomoko, wanafia huko huko. Delhi hadi Tanga, mabinti wanadanga, mkono uende kinywani, watoto wende shuleni. Kwa nini hatuelewi na kujifanya visiwi? Hasigeli majumbani, tuwarejesha utumwani. Sasa korona metua, maisha kuyachukua. Wafanyakazi imetelekezwa, makazini wafukuzwa. Madereva wa maroli, bodaboda na toroli, walimu wa mashuleni na wasusi wa saluni. Mtakubali kuendelea kunyonywa huku mkinywea? Wakati ndio huu wa kuanza vita kuu. Wajenzi wa majumba, mafundi wa mabomba, manesi wa hospitali, msikubali hii hali. Unganeni, unganeni, njooni mapambanoni, kulidai jasho lenu lifaidishe wanenu. Zishikeni hatamu za dola na kalamu, jifungeni mkanda mvitwae viwanda. Thank you.
Asante sana. I hope vita kuu sio vita vya silaha, ni vita vya hoja. Jamani, niwashukuru sana. Thank you very much. May I request you to give a big round of applause to our presenters. And to yourself for the 10 minutes that we have gone over and above the allocated time. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Back to the organizers.
Thank you, Chair, Dr. Donald and Mary, and three presenters, Professor Kaeli, Professor Kenyondo, and my student, Sabato Nyamsenda, for a very interesting discussion. This is one of those discussions you would say, kisu kimefika kwenye mfupa, kisu kilifika kwenye mfupa. Kwa hiyo tutakwenda kuwapashia kama tulivyofanya kwenye panel iliyopita. Pasha kwa presenters wetu, pasha, choma. Thank you very much. Kulikuwa kuna swali ambalo aliuliza kijana mmoja pale kwamba chuo kinafanya nini kuwajenga wanafunzi kwenye mijadala. Nataka kupa taarifa fupi, sisemi kwa niaba ya chuo, lakini kwa taarifa fupi, sisi kama course ambako wewe unasoma mwanafunzi wa political science, tuna midahalo huo tunafanya kila siku ya Jumatano kuanzia saa 10 mpaka saa 8, na kesho tuna mdahalo mzito kuhusu mkataba wa bandari. Thank you. Unakaribishwa. Saa 8 mpaka saa 10. Saa 8 mpaka saa 10. Jumatano saa 8 mpaka saa 10. Physically unaweza kuja course boardroom au ukafollow kupitia Zoom. Kwa hiyo kila siku Jumatano saa 8 mpaka saa 10. With that, we are going to break for lunch. We are going to break for lunch, 30 minutes break. The geography is the same. Karibuni sana.
Historically,